The Pacific Northwest in late October is a study in contrasts. Breathtaking beauty and looming danger intertwine beneath a canopy of endless rain. Fog drifts between the Sitka spruce and Douglas firs. The air smells of cedar, cold earth, and something ancient. Trails twist deeper into Olympic National Park, one of the last truly wild places left in America. This is where 35-year-old Laura Macke came seeking solitude. She wasn't a novice hiker. Friends describe her as thoughtful, independent, comfortable in nature. She had planned her solo backpacking trip carefully, securing a backcountry permit for October 30th and 31st, 2022, intending to hike the Enchanted Valley Trail via Graves Creek, camp overnight at Paradise Creek, and possibly continue toward the Enchanted Valley Chalet, a weathered landmark deep in the wilderness. It was a trip of quiet escape, not risk, or so it seemed. Olympic National Park covers nearly 1 million acres. Its rivers and moss-covered valleys are vast and deceivingly remote. One step off trail can erase all trace of traveler. And by late October, the Pacific storms roll in heavy and fast. Rain, fog, wind, and swollen creeks that can turn gentle paths into impassable torrents overnight. Laura entered the park on October 30th, 2022. According to her permit, she planned to be out by the 31st, maybe the morning of November 1st. But as the days passed, no one heard from her. By November 2nd, when she hadn't returned or checked in, park rangers were alerted. A missing hiker report was filed, and search and rescue teams were mobilized. What began as routine concerns soon escalated into something far more serious. The Enchanted Valley, for all its beauty, is one of the most unforgiving corners of Olympic National Park. The terrain cuts through rainforests and glacial rivers. In fall, water levels surge unpredictably, bridges wash out, and visibility can vanish within minutes. That week, the weather had taken a turn. Heavy rain pounded the Quinault region. Winds picked up, grounding helicopters and flooding streams. The kind of weather that even seasoned hikers know to avoid. Somewhere in that wilderness, Laura was alone. No phone signal, no witnesses, no clear trace of where she'd gone. Her description was circulated. 5'6", about 200 pounds, light brown curly hair cut in a bob, and a pack that likely carried rain gear, food, and camping essentials. She often wore a black and white striped shirt, a black rain jacket, and a maroon puffy coat. Layers meant for cold, wet days. Rangers hoped that someone might have seen her on the trail before the storms rolled in. They didn't. The search began immediately. Rangers focused first on her planned route, the Paradise Creek and Enchanted Valley area. The trailhead at Graves Creek became a staging point, trucks, tents, and radio chatter filling the damp forest air. Helicopters from the U.S. Coast Guard scanned the river valleys between storms, when the clouds broke for only minutes at a time. On the ground, teams from the National Park Service, Jefferson County Search and Rescue, and volunteers fanned out along every branch of the trail. But Laura's trail was faint, and the weather was unrelenting. For the first 48 hours, rescuers fought both terrain and time. They searched through rain that soaked every layer of clothing, over slick roots and unstable slopes. Each passing hour reduced the odds of finding a missing hiker alive. In the control tent, maps spread across folding tables. Her likely routes were marked, possible campsites, river crossings, trail junctions. Yet even those simple assumptions meant little when the wilderness decides otherwise. Nature doesn't always tell the same story twice. And in the Olympic rainforest, a single mistake can disappear under water, mud, or moss before anyone ever finds it. By November 3rd, National Park officials publicly announced the search. A photo of Laura was released, the kind that carries a haunting weight once a person is missing. Her image circulated through Washington newsrooms and online communities. Strangers shared it widely, hoping that anyone, had seen her before the storms came in. But no hikers came forward with sightings. No footprints. No gear. No tent. For the family watching from home, each news update felt suspended in uncertainty. There were no answers, just the same question echoing louder by the hour. Where was Laura? She was one person among the trees, the kind of wilderness that both humbles and consumes. And yet, her story had only begun. There's a particular silence in Olympic National Park after a storm, the kind that feels alive, thick with mist and echo. In that silence, somewhere between the Quinault River and the jagged ridges of the Enchanted Valley, 35-year-old Laura Macke was simply gone. By November 2nd, 2022, her name had been entered into official logs as overdue. Rangers had checked the permit office. No exit record. No campsite report. Her car remained parked near the Graves Creek Trailhead, rain dripping off the hood in quiet intervals. It was the only sign she'd made it this far. The next morning, the search widened. Olympic National Park Search and Rescue Team, joined by the U.S. Coast Guard and Jefferson County SAR, moved into the forest. Their focus, the Enchanted Valley Trail, the same 13-mile stretch Laura had planned to hike solo. This trail is one of the park's most iconic routes, known for its towering cliffs, waterfalls, and a deep isolation that draws hikers seeking peace. But in late autumn, the same valley becomes a labyrinth of danger. Rivers surge, bridges collapse. Fog can erase a person from view, even a few feet away. The team began at the Graves Creek Trailhead, pushing through dense vegetation and saturated mud. They followed the path toward Paredes Creek, the site listed on Laura's backcountry permit. Normally, it's a 3 to 4 hour hike, manageable, scenic, and quiet. Now, it was a test of endurance. The rain hadn't stopped for days. Water poured off the ridges, forming new streams that hadn't existed the week before. Each step echoed the question that no one dared say aloud. Did she ever make it past this point? Helicopter units took to the air between weather breaks, scanning the Quinault Valley for flashes of color, a tent, a jacket, anything unnatural in the endless green. But visibility was poor, often limited to a few hundred feet before disappearing into fog. The Coast Guard crew made multiple low sweeps along the river corridor, reporting no sign of Laura or her gear. On the ground, Rangers divided into smaller teams, methodically checking established campsites, side trails, and river crossings. They called her name, sometimes blowing whistles into the void, waiting for an echo that never came. By the 4th day, fatigue was setting in. The forest had a way of blurring time, one mossy ridge blending into another. Each ravine looked like the last, and the constant drizzle blurred compass bearings. There were no footprints in the mud, no scraps of clothing or dropped equipment, not even a trace of a campsite. It was as though Laura had stepped off the trail and vanished into the earth. The National Park Service released a public statement that same week, asking for information from anyone who had been in the backcountry between October 30th and November 1st. The plea was urgent. Even a minor sighting could help narrow the timeline. But the park was quiet. Visitor numbers were low in late October, and those who had entered during the storm had already checked out safely. For Laura's family, the waiting was unbearable. Every new report carried the same words. Search continues. No clues found. In a press update, the park described Laura as equipped for cool, wet conditions. A rain jacket, warm clothing, supplies for an overnight trip. She was not believed to have intended an extended stay. That meant rescuers were racing against the biological clock. Exposure, cold, and dehydration could be fatal in days. Behind the scenes, the Search Command Center worked with precise urgency. Teams logged GPS coordinates of each sweep, ensuring no area was overlooked. Still, the data told a frustrating truth. Large portions of the Enchanted Valley remained unsearchable due to weather and terrain. The Quinault River, swollen with rain, had flooded sections of trail, washing away small bridges and covering rock crossings under fast-moving current. If Laura had tried to cross during those conditions, she could have been swept away in seconds. But without evidence, it remained one possibility among many. By November 4th, the media began picking up the story. Local outlets, King 5 Seattle, the Olympian, and Peninsula Daily News ran short reports. Search underway for missing hiker in Olympic National Park. A photograph of Laura, smiling, her light brown curls brushing her cheeks, appeared on every broadcast. It's an image that now carries the weight of absence. Over the following days, the search continued. Helicopters when weather allowed, drones where signal permitted, ground crews from dawn to dusk. Each night, they regrouped under tarps, trading maps and notes, soaked to the bone. Every lead came back empty. And then came the realization that would change the mission's tone entirely. After more than a week, despite coordinated searches by land, air, and river, no trace of Laura was found. On November 10th, 2022, the National Park Service announced the operation was transitioning to a limited continuous search. That phrase, gentle as it sounded, meant the official search was being scaled back. Rangers would continue to look when new information arose or when conditions improved, but the intensive effort was ending. In the official release, park officials expressed sympathy for the family and gratitude to the search teams who had worked tirelessly through extremely difficult conditions. Between the lines, the truth was clear. After 11 days, survival was no longer likely. As news spread, online communities formed. Family members and supporters created social media pages to keep the search visible, refusing to let her name fade into the noise of statistics. Hundreds of strangers joined, drawn by empathy and curiosity. But information remained scarce. The Enchanted Valley, beautiful and merciless, had kept its secrets. No gear, no tent, no sign of life or struggle. The forest was once again silent, as if it swallowed her whole. For those who loved her, the question remained suspended in the mist. How can a person disappear so completely in a place others walk every summer? It wasn't just a mystery anymore. It was a haunting, one that would linger over Olympic National Park long after the search teams packed up and left. The call for help came early, November 2nd, 2022. Olympic National Park Dispatch confirmed what everyone feared. No sign of Laura Macke, last seen days earlier on her solo backcountry hike through the Quinault region. Her vehicle was still parked at the Graves Creek Trailhead, slick with rain and surrounded by the smell of wet pine. Inside were no clues, no note, no sign she had planned to stay longer than her 2-day permit. The next morning, search operations began in earnest. Rangers from Olympic National Park Search and Rescue, supported by Jefferson County SAR and the U.S. Coast Guard, converged on the area. Their command post rose in the fog, a canvas of radios, maps, thermoses, and fatigue. It wasn't the first time they'd done this, but the timing was bad. A Pacific storm system had arrived the same day. Winds gusted through the valley, bending treetops and shaking the canopy loose. The Quinault River roared louder than normal, brown and swollen from days of heavy rain. Temperatures hovered in the low 40s. For a missing person, that combination, cold, wet, and alone, is deadly within days. Still, they pressed on. A Coast Guard MH-65 Dolphin helicopter launched from Port Angeles, slicing through low clouds toward the Enchanted Valley. From above, the rainforest looked endless. Folds of green, tangled brush, and countless ravines leading nowhere. The crew flew low over Paredes Creek and the Enchanted Valley Chalet, searching for any flash of color. The red of a tent, the shine of a rain jacket, the silver of an emergency blanket. Nothing. Ground teams pushed forward on foot. They crossed slick log bridges, waded through knee-deep mud, and followed animal trails through ferns taller than themselves. They carried radios that often failed in the deep canyons and whistles that vanished into the sound of rain. They called her name anyway, over and over. Laura. Sometimes they thought they heard something. The whisper of wind through cedar branches, a faint echo that faded as quickly as it came. Each night, rescuers returned to base camp soaked and shivering. They circled the maps again, noting which quadrants had been cleared. The Enchanted Valley Trail, the side routes toward O'Neill Creek, the Elwha Basin, the upper slopes that rarely saw visitors, all methodically checked. Nothing stood out. Days passed like this, a relentless cycle of hope and exhaustion. Local news outlets began reporting the story on November 3rd. Search underway for missing hiker in Olympic National Park. The National Park Service released official statements, urging anyone who had hiked in the area between October 30th and November 1st to contact authorities. The photo they included, Laura smiling softly, curly light brown hair framing her face, became the image that defined the case. Across Washington state, people shared her story. In small towns, outdoor forums, and social media groups, hikers offered route analyses, topographic maps, and theories of where she might have gone. Yet each trail, each fork, led back to the same truth. There was no trace. Search and rescue teams described the conditions as among the toughest they'd faced that year. Rain and flooding made some trails impassable. Sections of the Graves Creek Road washed out entirely. Helicopters were repeatedly grounded by fog, forcing rescuers to rely solely on slow ground sweeps. Even drones were of little use. Dense canopy and low visibility turned aerial scans into guesswork. Still, they refused to stop. Each time the rain eased, the helicopter launched again. Crews peered through open doors with binoculars, marking coordinates of anything remotely unusual. On one pass, a team spotted what appeared to be disturbed brush near Paredes Creek, but the ground unit later confirmed it was natural debris. Day after day, they returned empty-handed. As the search entered its second week, the tone inside the command tent began to shift. Maps were crowded with circles and grids. Nearly every reachable section of a plan route had been combed multiple times. Rescue dogs had been brought in where the rain allowed, but constant rain washed away scent trails within hours. One park official later described it plainly. It's as though she disappeared into thin air. The National Park Service continued to brief the public daily, balancing transparency with caution. They reiterated that foul play was not suspected. All evidence indicated a backcountry disappearance consistent with environmental hazards. Still, the uncertainty weighed heavily. On November 10th, 2022, the announcement came. After more than a week of nonstop searching, the operation would be scaled back to a limited continuous search. That meant rangers would continue to monitor the area and follow any new leads, but could no longer sustain the large-scale daily mobilization. Weather, terrain, and lack of clues made further efforts unsafe and unlikely to succeed. The decision wasn't made lightly. Every rescuer knew the implications. Survival time had likely run out. The family was informed first. Park officials expressed deep sympathy and promised to keep the case open, ready to re-engage if new information surfaced. The press release thanked the dozens of volunteers and agencies involved, acknowledging that they had searched tirelessly through extremely challenging conditions. That same day, social media flooded with tributes. Friends, family, and strangers sharing messages of hope and grief. Some held on to the idea that Laura might still be alive, waiting in a remote shelter. Others, quietly, began to accept what the wilderness had likely claimed. For the teams leaving the park, the hardest part wasn't the exhaustion. It was the absence of closure. No sign meant no story to tell, no certainty to hold on to. Just silence. The same silence they had called her name into for days. And as the helicopters lifted off for the final time, the Quinault Valley swallowed the sound. The forest closed in. The rain began again. Laura was still out there, somewhere beyond reach, beyond knowing, and the mountain kept its secret. By the time the search scaled back on November 10th, 2022, the Quinault Valley was quiet again. The last of the rescue trucks rolled down the forest road, their headlights cutting through mist and rain. The forest had echoed with radio chatter and rotor blades only days before it was once again still. But far from Olympic National Park, the waiting had just begun. For Laura Macke's family, the news that the official search was being reduced hit like a tidal wave. They had clung to every update, every press release, every photo of rangers trekking through the mud. But now the words limited continuous search marked a painful shift. It meant that the daily efforts were ending, and hope was slipping into something quieter, harder to name. Yet they refused to let the story fade. Within hours of the announcement, friends and relatives created a Facebook page dedicated to Laura's disappearance. The goal was simple: keep her face in public view, keep her name circulating. They shared maps of the area, descriptions of her gear, and reminders that someone might have crossed paths with her before the storm rolled in. Please, one post read, if you were hiking in Olympic National Park between October 30th and November 1st, contact the National Park Service. We need any information at all. The community rallied. People from Washington State and beyond commented with messages of support. Hikers offering route advice, strangers pledging to search nearby trails, others simply writing, "We're praying for you." But behind the digital noise, there was a growing stillness. As days became weeks, the reality of what had happened in that rainforest began to sink in. Laura had been well equipped for her overnight trip. A tent, food, proper clothing for cold rain. She had followed procedure, obtained a backcountry permit, and informed others of her route. She had not been reckless. The conditions had simply turned hostile: relentless storms, rapidly rising rivers, and poor visibility that could have disoriented even experienced hikers. Family members spoke to local media, describing her as independent, adventurous, and kind-hearted. She loved the outdoors, they said, but respected it too. She had a calmness that made her presence reassuring, the kind of person who found peace in solitude. In interviews, park rangers echoed those sentiments with professionalism tinged with sorrow. "We searched every area she was expected to be," one ranger told reporters. "We combed Graves Creek, Enchanted Valley, all the campsites along that route. But the conditions were incredibly difficult: flooding, mudslides, constant rain." It wasn't just a search anymore. It had become an endurance of uncertainty. Each night, Laura's family waited by the phone, hoping for a call, any sign that something new had been found. Each morning, they woke to the same silence. They checked weather reports for Olympic National Park, studied maps, and spoke with others who had lost loved ones in wilderness areas. They learned what few ever want to know: how quickly a person can vanish in nature. Even with GPS, dogs, drone, and helicopters, vast sections of the park remain practically impenetrable. Steep canyons, hidden creeks, and dense canopy make aerial searches nearly useless. One ranger put it bluntly: "You can be standing 20 feet from something and never see it." Still, the family held on to slivers of hope. Maybe Laura had found shelter in an abandoned structure. Maybe she was injured but alive, waiting for help. But as November turned to December, the storms grew worse. Snow layered the ridges, and temperatures dropped near freezing. The National Park Service kept the case open, continuing limited searches whenever conditions allowed. They checked riverbanks after storms, logged new coordinates from hikers who thought they saw something unusual. Every lead was investigated. None led to Laura. The online community that had formed around her case evolved into something deeper: a digital vigil. People posted memories of loved ones lost in wilderness areas. Others shared safety tips for solo hikers. It became both a search network and a tribute page, a place where the ache of not knowing was met with compassion. Through it all, her family remained steady. They spoke carefully, avoiding speculation, focusing on gratitude for the rescuers who had risked their safety in harsh conditions. They asked for privacy, but also for awareness that even in a world mapped by satellites, people can still disappear into nature without a trace. Winter settled over Olympic National Park. Snow blanketed the trails and the river valleys, sealing the forest under white silence. The Graves Creek Trailhead, where a car still stood for weeks after, became a haunting symbol of that silence. Some hikers passing through in early 2023 reported stopping there, reading the missing post on the bulletin board, and pausing for a moment of quiet respect. "The park is full of beauty," they said, "but it feels different now, as though it remembers." For Laura's loved ones, each passing month without answers didn't bring closure, only endurance. Hope was still there, but it had changed shape. It became quieter, more fragile, grounded in the wish that someday someone would find something: a backpack, a boot, anything. Because in the end, for families of the missing, certainty, even heartbreaking certainty, is kinder than endless waiting. And so, as 2022 drew to a close, the story of Laura Macke rested in that in-between place where hope and grief meet. The official search had ended. The weather had closed in, but the longing for answers refused to fade. Somewhere beyond the Quinault River, beyond the soaked ferns and hidden creeks, lay the truth of what happened. And until that truth surfaced, Laura's name would not be forgotten. Olympic National Park has always been a paradox, majestic yet merciless. Nearly 1 million acres of rainforest, alpine peaks, and coastal cliffs make it one of America's most diverse landscapes. But beneath the beauty lies something else, a sense that the wilderness does not care who enters or who fails to return. For searchers looking for 47-year-old Laura Macke, that indifference was felt every day. By mid-November 2022, the official search had stretched into its second week. The operation had grown quieter, but determination remained. Rangers, deputies, and volunteers moved methodically through areas that had already been covered, revisiting old ground in hopes that shifting snow or receding water might reveal something new. Each morning began before dawn. Maps were spread across tables at the Sol Duc command post. Teams were assigned quadrants. Radios crackled to life, and then they disappeared into the forest. The conditions were punishing. Daytime temperatures hovered just above freezing. Nights plunged below. The rain rarely stopped, and when it did, it left behind mist so thick it blurred the tree line. Fallen branches snapped underfoot, echoing like faint gunfire in the distance. The terrain swallowed sound, disorienting even experienced trackers. Search dogs were deployed again, their handlers hopeful the scent trail might linger near the car. But moisture, wind, and time had stripped the ground of traces. The dogs circled, then faltered. No alerts, no leads. As days turned into weeks, the mission shifted from rescue to recovery. It's a change no one wants to admit. Yet in a landscape this vast, the odds of survival diminished fast. Rangers knew it. The family knew it. Still, no one said it aloud. Local news outlets began reporting on the case, describing Laura as kind, dependable, and quietly adventurous. She'd spent much of her adult life in Iowa, close to family, rarely taking risks. Friends said her trip west had been a spontaneous decision, a chance to reset after a difficult year. She was looking for clarity, one friend said, not danger. But Olympic National Park in November is not forgiving to the unprepared. Even experienced hikers have lost their way there. The forest floor is uneven and tangled with roots. Compass readings are unreliable beneath the canopy. GPS devices lose signal. Streams appear shallow but hide slick rock beds that can sweep a person downstream within seconds. Rangers point out a sobering statistic. More than a dozen people have gone missing within the park's boundaries over the years. Some found months later, others never found at all. The park's topography, steep ravines, thick moss, dense brush, creates countless places where a person could vanish from sight within minutes. In early December, heavy snow returned, blanketing the Sol Duc Valley. What had once been a carpet of ferns and mud became a smooth, unbroken field of white. For searchers, it meant the end. Until the thaw, the forest was sealed. Laura's family returned to Iowa that winter, carrying the unbearable weight of uncertainty. They had no answers, no remains to grieve over, only the echo of her absence. Her sister described the drive back as the longest silence I've ever known. Meanwhile, park officials continued limited patrols, checking remote areas whenever weather allowed. Flyers remained posted at trailheads. Visitors who came to the park over the holidays would occasionally pause at those posters. The picture of Laura smiling gently. The words, "Missing since November 10th, 2022. Some took photos of it. Some said a quiet prayer before heading down the trail. What haunted many was how little was left behind. No discarded gear, no trace of struggle. It was as though she'd stepped into another world, one that refuses to give anything back. Even experienced rangers confessed how easily someone could become invisible there. You could be 20 feet away and not see a thing, one said. If she slipped, if she fell, we might never find her. In March 2023, as snow began to melt, rangers resumed patrols near the Sol Duc area. Hopes rose briefly. The melt often reveals what winter conceals. Teams combed creeks and slopes again, scanning for signs of clothing or bone. But once more, nothing surfaced. For investigators, every possibility remained on the table. Did Laura intentionally disappear? Did she wander off trail and succumb to the elements? Could she have been injured or met with someone inside the park? None of these questions could be definitively answered. What they knew for certain was that the wilderness had swallowed her whole, and if she was still out there, the forest was keeping her. By summer, the case had grown cold, but the searchers who had walked those trails hadn't forgotten. Many returned on personal time, following the same paths, standing by the riverbanks, scanning the ground for something, anything, that might tell them where Laura's story ended. Olympic National Park continued on, unchanged. Rivers flowed. Moss grew. The same fog that rolled through the valley when Laura vanished returned each morning. And in that mist, The mystery lingered, a quiet reminder of how easily a human life can disappear into nature's indifference. The park, one ranger later said, doesn't take people maliciously. It just doesn't give them back. And somewhere beyond a tree lean, in that vast and silent expanse, Laura Macke's story remained unfinished. Time has a way of stretching when there are no answers. For Laura Macke's family, the weeks after the search ended blurred into months, each one heavy with questions that would not let go. The wilderness had given them nothing, not a trace or clue, just silence. And so began the slow, painful transition from rescue to remembrance. In early 2023, when the snow melted in Olympic National Park, rangers once again walked the Sol Duc trails. This time, they weren't searching in force. The effort was quiet, methodical. Small teams checking runoff areas, washed-out creek beds, and remote ridgelines revealed by the thaw. The terrain had changed with the seasons. Streams had shifted, slopes eroded, branches fallen across old paths. Still, nothing emerged. Park officials updated their missing persons database. Laura Macke, age 47, last seen November 10, 2022. Vehicle recovered near Sol Duc Road. Body not found. The words were sterile, bureaucratic. Yet behind them lay a world of heartbreak. Back in Iowa, her family organized community vigils. They lit candles, shared stories, and read aloud her last text message. Simple, ordinary, but now weighted with finality. They refused to call it a memorial. Until she's found, her sister said, we're still searching. Social media groups began forming around the case. Some from well-intentioned strangers fascinated by missing persons. Others from true crime followers trying to piece together theories. There were speculations of voluntary disappearance, foul play, even cryptic links to other disappearances across the Olympic Peninsula. But law enforcement never found credible evidence of any of it. There was no sign she met anyone in the park, no indication of distress, and no digital footprint suggesting she planned to vanish. The National Park Service quietly revisited her case in spring 2023. Rangers reviewed drone footage taken during the initial search. They rechecked logs from park entrances. The timestamp showed she entered through the Sol Duc gate mid-afternoon. No record of her exiting. Beyond that, the park's vastness swallowed the timeline. Those who'd searched for her carried the memory of that November vividly. One ranger, now retired, said, I still think about her. The forest was so quiet it felt wrong. You expect to hear birds, wind, something, but it was like the whole place was holding its breath. By the summer of 2023, hikers occasionally reported seeing missing person flyers still posted near trailheads, weathered and sun-faded. A ranger would replace them when possible. Each new copy symbolized something between duty and hope. The disappearance also reignited debate about safety in America's national parks. Experts pointed out how difficult it is to find someone lost in terrain as dense as Olympic, with few surveillance cameras, unreliable GPS, and weather that changes by the hour. Even the most experienced search teams face impossible odds. The case of Laura Macke became one more reminder of that. Yet for her family, impossible wasn't enough. They coordinated privately funded search efforts later that year. Small groups of volunteers, some from Washington State, others who had followed the story online, ventured into the area again. They mapped ravines, scanned creek beds, and used drones with thermal and LiDAR capabilities. Each return yielded the same result. Nothing. By late 2023, the Macke family began working with missing persons advocacy groups to keep her story visible. They pushed for updates through the National Park Service, shared posts around anniversaries, and encouraged travelers to report any discovery, no matter how small. Even a piece of clothing, her brother said, could give us closure. The FBI and Clallam County Sheriff's Office both listed the case as open but inactive, a phrase that quietly defines hundreds of disappearances across the Pacific Northwest. Cases where no foul play is proven, yet no body is found. In the spring of 2024, a hiker discovered an old chute along the Sol Duc River. It was logged and tested, but DNA revealed it wasn't Laura's. Another false lead, another heartbreak. And so, the forest kept its silence. As months turned into another year, the story of Laura Macke began to fade from headlines. But in Port Angeles and Forks, locals still remember. Park rangers still glance toward the Sol Duc turnout when they pass by. Every now and then, a car will pull over, a stranger will step out, and they'll stand quietly, looking into the trees that took her. Her family, too, learned to live with that silence, though never to accept it. You don't stop hoping, her sister said in an interview. You just start carrying the hope differently. Today, more than 2 years later, Laura Macke remains missing. No confirmed sightings. No physical evidence. Just a date, November 10th, 2022, and a stretch of forest where time seems to hold her still. In the archives of the National Park Service, her case file sits among dozens of others marked active, unresolved. On paper, it's just another missing person. But in truth, it's a story about how quickly the line between adventure and tragedy can vanish. Somewhere beyond the Sol Duc River, beyond the mist and the moss-covered ridges, lies whatever remains of that November afternoon. Whether hidden by nature or lost to it, the mystery of Laura Macke endures, quietly, hauntingly, like a whisper carried to the evergreens. And in Olympic National Park, where beauty and peril exist side by side, that whisper still drifts through the fog, reminding anyone who dares to enter. The wilderness always remembers, even if it never speaks.